Today we're talking about the best approach you can take when creating characters. I'm not going to give you a checklist or anything like that. Sometimes those are not really that helpful. What I am going to do, we're going to talk about how to conceptualize creating characters, how to think about how to approach character creation and its process. I'm also going to touch on the initial characters that you should be creating first and give you some tips. So a lot of stuff. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out some links below. There's a screenwriting class if you're interested in that. There's a free guide on story structure. So if you think those will be helpful, be sure to check them out. All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's jump in. When it comes to story and storytelling, just this whole process of writing a screenplay and hopefully it gets made into a movie or a TV show or whatever you're working on, there are a lot of important pieces. The most important one, though, for the audience are the characters. The characters are who the audience connects to. Yes, they might start watching or be interested in watching because of the premise, but as soon as we start watching the story unfold, it's all about the characters. And so you've got to make sure that you are creating characters in ways that are helpful to you and beneficial to the story and for the audience. So lots of pieces to kind of keep track of and things to juggle. You might have even heard the phrase that you should create character-driven stories. Now, this phrase sometimes gets a little misused because people think that it only applies to dramas, right? So it's just a character story. But every story should be character driven. Sometimes the character is moving a lot, sometimes they're just moving a little, but the story should still be driven by characters. So every story should be a character driven story. So whether you're writing a sci-fi or fantasy or action adventure, drama, rom-com, whatever it is, it should be a character driven story. And there are two ways that writers tend to create characters. The first is, I'm just going to imagine a character like this would be a really interesting character to have a story about. And we start fleshing out the character. We figure out some of their background. We start doing things and, trying to understand what makes them tick and what their personality is like. And then once we have that, then we start trying to create a story around them. And this is the trap of this whole character-driven story element, is because people think, well, it's got to be character-driven, so I start with character, and I create the character first and then the story. The other way is to imagine a story first, to figure out the broad strokes of the plot and the world a little bit, like what's happening, what's going on, what are the broad strokes, and then create characters to fit into that. And a lot of people kind of pan this notion of doing it this way because makes it feel like the characters are a little stilted. And if you don't finish developing the character, then yes, they can be very stilted. But I'm going to propose to you that the second way, the one that you create the story first and then the characters around it, that's actually the better way to do it, because it makes your writing more efficient, it makes your use of time more efficient, and all the characters are serving the story. So let's pull this apart a little bit. If you've watched any other videos on this channel, you've probably heard me explain what a story is and give you just a very good, solid working definition, but I'm going to do it again because it's really relevant here. A story is about someone who wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. That's what a story is, and commit that to memory. It will save you so much time, I promise. And in this very definition of story, we have our protagonist. We actually have a few characters once we start kind of pulling it apart, because what we're going to do is we're going to start to reverse engineer, in a sense, our characters for the story. So you have this someone, which you kind of need, yes, a rough idea of generally who they are, but I would say not give them a name, okay? Give them one characteristic that's specific to them. So an oil driller, or a world-renowned author, or a biologist, or whatever it is, okay? These are like the core characteristic of who this character is. That's the someone. Someone, a biologist, wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. And what this does is it actually gives you a place to start creating characters. You don't have to flounder around like, well, maybe I need this kind of character, maybe I need this kind of character, maybe this one should be like this, maybe this one should be like this. No. We've got our story. Someone who wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. And once you kind of figure out what that is, now you just work backward. Now you just start at the end. This is who the character needs to be at the end. Okay, so then you start figuring out, where do they come from, right? What is their trajectory? What is the path that they travel on? I want to figure out all the other little pieces now about this main character. That doesn't mean, though, that I start delving into their background and all that. No. We're focused on the story at this point. Okay, so we want to make sure that the story is working. So conceptually, I need to think about my characters more broadly. I want to know, like, okay, they're going to end up over here, so that means they need to start over here. And here's all the pieces they go through. And I start at the end and I work backward. And typically what people do is we start at the beginning and try to work forward. And all of a sudden our plot is sprawling and we've got all these other characters that we don't need. And we've got 170 pages or 40 pages for a screenplay that's supposed to be around 100, 120 pages. And we're going, I don't understand. It's because there's no structure. Okay, the structure and understanding what a story is going to help you streamline this whole entire process. And so what you do, you figure out what the story is. Someone wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. That's what it is. Okay, so here's who our character is, here's where they end, and now just back up. What are the big moments that we want to see them go through? And that will help you start to create and flesh out your character. But this definition of story also helps you create the antagonist, right? Someone who wants something badly, but they're having trouble getting it. Okay, so what is causing your protagonist to have trouble getting what they're after? It's usually the antagonist, okay? And it doesn't matter whether the antagonist is a person or a force or even the protagonist themselves. Sometimes you have a character who's their own worst enemy. They're fighting their own personal demons, and so they're sabotaging themselves at points along the journey. But understanding what your story is helps you figure out who the antagonist is, because you know what your character's after, and you start to figure out what is the trouble they're going to have getting it. Is it an opposing force like a volcano or an earthquake or zombies or whatever it is? Is it another person who's wanting something similar, like both people are trying to race to, figure out a cure for something and they're sabotaging each other? Maybe it's that. Or it's the character's own personal demons that are causing them to have problems, like they have a gambling problem and they need to be working and they're just kind of self-destructive in ways that are not healthy. Ideally, you want your protagonist and your antagonist, if it's a person, to kind of be reflections of each other. That one of them, they want the same thing, but they want it for different reasons, right? They're like, it's like two sides of the coin. Okay, so there's this side and there's this side. And that starts to get into the theme of your story, and you start to kind of figure out, what is your story really about? When people ask you what your story's about, yes, in some ways they're asking about the plot, but what they're really asking is, why would I care about this story? Oh, it's about, it's a story of redemption, or it's a story about equality, right? Like, that's what the story's about. That's the theme. And you want your characters, your protagonist and your antagonist especially, to kind of be reflections of each other. They're similar and they're not. And if you can create this kind of reflection, this two sides of the coin, what it does is it helps make it feel like those two characters really do belong in the story. And this is the danger of creating a character first and then trying to wrap a story around the character, is you end up with characters that don't really feel like they fit the story, but you kind of care about them and you feel like you need them for the story to make sense because they're in the orbit of your protagonist, but they're not really reflections. They're not really orchestrated to help you tell the story. And this is the thing, I see this sometimes. People will comment about, I'm trying to understand my character. I'm trying to figure them out. What are some ways that I can figure out my character, or what they're about, or who they're like, as if the characters are real people. They are not. You are not trying to extract anything from a character. You, the storyteller, are infusing the characters with all the elements that they need to tell the story effectively. You are infusing them with their personalities, with their wants and their desires and their goals, and all of those things should serve the story. So if you're just kind of creating characters willy-nilly, like, that's not really going to be helpful. Try to understand what your story is and start working backward. And just in this definition here, someone wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. You know who your protagonist is, you know who your antagonist is. So I've got my protagonist, my antagonist. But there's a few other characters that you can create just off of this, and that you need to create before you even really sit down to start like outlining or planning your story. Like, we haven't even gotten to that yet. We're just conceptualizing and figuring out the story. One additional character you can create is either a buddy or a love interest for your protagonist. Now, let me say this here, I'm going to interject. You don't have to create buddies and love interest. I'm giving you a few characters that you probably should create if you're going to create them before you even start figuring out the rest of the story. You need to know who these are. So if you don't want one of these, that's fine. Okay. But at this point, this is the point where you start to figure them out. Okay, so if you have a buddy or a love interest, sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's not. Okay, sometimes the love interest has more of a significant role in the story, sometimes not as much of a significant role, but you need to know that, because that buddy, that love interest, is going to create some trouble for the main character getting whatever they're after. They should be, in some ways, an opponent to them. Not competing against them, but giving them problems or giving them conflict of interest or moral quandaries that they have to wrestle with. So you can start to figure out who is this buddy or who is this love interest. But this is the point in the story creation process where you just start to figure out who are the other main players that are going to cause problems for my protagonist in the story. So you've got your protagonist, you have your antagonist, you have a buddy or a love interest, maybe the same person. At this point, you might also want to create a sidekick character for your antagonist or for your protagonist, or maybe like a henchman or a muscle, an enforcer kind of person, or second in command, somebody that's always loyal, that's always just helping. So you might figure out who might be helping your protagonist, who might be helping your antagonist, and if they're helping the antagonist, they're hurting their protagonist. And these are the big sweeping strokes you're wanting to figure out here at the beginning. You might also need an explainer character, a mentor, a coach, a teacher, a supervisor, someone that's been there, that knows what's going on, that explains things to your protagonist, but as they're explaining your protagonist who doesn't know, they're also explaining to the audience who doesn't know. So you might be starting to figure out, okay, I kind of need this type of character here at the beginning. Now, they're not necessarily going to hurt your protagonist, maybe, unless they're lying to them, but they are going to provide significant turns, right? If you get some new information that you didn't know about, well, I thought I was going this way, but now I need to go this way. That's why that character is important, because they help shape the trajectory of your protagonist. So just in understanding what your story is, someone who wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. You're able to create your protagonist, your antagonist, a buddy and or a love interest, a sidekick for your protagonist, a sidekick for your antagonist, and possibly an explainer character. These are the core characters you really need to make sure your story is working. If you can kind of imagine all the major beats, and all those major beats happen with those characters, and you're starting to figure out a little bit about who they are as people and what kind of things they need to be doing and how they're going to kind of interact with each other, just the broad strokes. Again, you don't need to be diving into the details yet. Okay, this is conceptual. So if you can figure out who all those characters are initially, you're going to be so much further down the road, and your characters that you're creating are going to help your story. They're actually going to help you. They're not going to send you chasing rabbits in random directions. It's going to help you stay focused and tell the story that you're wanting to tell. Now, I want to give you 3 tips for how to reverse engineer. So just some things to think about as you start working backward, as you start kind of conceptually thinking about creating these characters. Before I do that, I just want to mention one thing. Thank you for supporting this channel. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it. You can show your support by hitting the like button. That's the easiest thing to do. If you're finding value, just hit the like button. You can subscribe if you haven't done that. Hit the bell if you want to be notified of new videos. You can also comment below. And if you're going to comment and you're like, I don't know what to comment, just type in the name of one of your favorite characters and why they're your favorite character from any film. Like, this is my favorite character of all time is so-and-so, and then why. Or you can also even share this video. If you have other friends that are into screenwriting or wanting to learn screenwriting, share this video with them. YouTube really likes all those kinds of interactions. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for watching. Okay, 3 tips. Tip number 1, when you're creating your protagonist, you need to decide if they are an expert or a novice. Ideally, both. And let me explain. On one hand, you can have a character who is an expert at something, but it's an innate ability. Okay, it's just something that's part of them. It's who they are. They're actually really good or really gifted or really talented at this one thing, but they're a novice because they don't know how to use it. They haven't tapped that power yet. They don't fully understand the scope of what they're capable of. And this would be characters like Harry Potter, Luke Skywalker, Frodo Baggins, Clarice Starling, Diana Prince, Wonder Woman, or even Rocky Balboa. Or maybe they are a noted expert in the field. Okay, they're really solid. They have a really great understanding of this one thing, and they're just awesome. Okay, but they are put in a brand new situation that is unfamiliar to them. So they are a novice in this situation. They're supposed to tap into the skills that they have over here to be successful over here, but this is brand new to them. So they are a novice. And this would be characters like Harry Stamper, Maximus Decimus Meridius, Thor, Superman, Lara Croft, and John Wick. So what you're wanting to do is create your protagonist who is an expert or a novice, preferably both. If you can do that, you're going to be well on your way to helping create your character, because now they're automatically going to have skills built in, or they automatically have innate abilities built in, and they either have to discover them or figure out how to use what they know in this brand new situation, which is going to give you plenty of juice and conflict to tell your story. Tip number 2, all your characters need to reflect your theme in some way. Now, you don't want to start off telling your story by just having your theme at the forefront and you start creating your characters based around the theme. You can kind of do that. I'll circle back to that in a second. But sometimes what that does is that starts making your writing feel a little too polemic. It's too preachy. It's just too much. Okay. And you don't want that. But what you do want is you want to have characters that have different perspectives on the theme. So in our story with our biologist, for example, maybe our theme is about morality around science. And you have one character that is just wanting to solve the problem. You have another character that feels very strongly about testing it and testing it in responsible ways. You have another character that is like, you don't need to test it at all. And what happens is, if you can start to figure out how each of your characters have a different perspective on the theme, you drop any two of them in any room, there's going to be conflict. Okay, because they're going to, at their core, be opposed to each other's philosophy on how they're approaching what they're doing. Now, again, you don't want to write into the theme, right? I don't want to just put it in there too much, but if I'm aware of it at the beginning when I'm creating my characters, it's really going to help me down the road. It helps me pull the theme out. It helps me tell what my story is really about, and it helps all the characters interact, and it creates conflict along the way. So it's just helpful in a lot of ways. The third tip is details matter. The trap is writers start to figure out all the details too soon. We start trying to provide background for the character and all the little stuff like where they went to school and what they did and what's their philosophy on this and what happens if this happens. Like, we try to figure all these things out and create all these details because we know that the details is what makes the characters pop. It's what makes them come alive on the screen. And that's what we want. Ultimately, that's what we want. But you just don't want to do it too early. I tend to advise to let the details come out in the writing. Like, if you can figure out what the broad strokes are, here's the base characteristics of my character, their main personality, the things they got to do, the things they believe in, just kind of the broad strokes. Then when I get to writing, now I can find the details. I can figure out like, oh, this makes the scene funny if they don't like green beans, or this really helps if they're just opposed to the color blue, or whatever it is. And now I got to figure out why. Like, those little details make your characters kind of stand out. So yes, you need them, but not early on. So just push that desire to create all the details till later in the process. Don't try to create them too early. figure out your story, figure out the main characters you need to make your story work, and put the details in later, discover them later with the characters as the characters start to come alive and kind of talk to you in some ways. All right, let me give you a little bonus tip, and I mentioned some things about theme, so let me kind of circle back around to that. What I'm telling you to do is to create your characters based on your story. Figure your story out. Someone wants something badly, they're having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. And you can reverse engineer your characters off of that. One other way to reverse engineer your characters is off of a theme. So let's say I have this theme of like, responsibility, morality in science. And some people, I've got one character that it's like, okay, no moral obligation, we just want to solve the problem. Another one is we want to be very careful and work very slow and be very diligent to make sure that it doesn't hurt people. Somebody else is like, you know what, if it hurts people that are old, doesn't matter. Somebody else, if it hurts people that are young, doesn't matter. Some people are like, hey, test it on animals. Some people are, no, don't test it on animals. And you start creating all these different viewpoints around this theme. And you can then reverse engineer your characters. Okay, I want this character to have this one to have this one to have this one. And you can kind of start to reverse engineer. It's a little more challenging and it's a little more difficult to do, but it can be done. So it's another way to kind of reverse engineer your characters and make sure all your characters fit your story, that they all are reflecting the theme, that they're all working together, but you don't have to totally have your story figured out. If you're a new writer though, I will tell you, figuring out your story first, that's by far the better way to do it. So figure out your story, reverse engineer your main characters and the key characters, and then start working forward from there. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it has, please be sure to like, subscribe, bell, all that stuff. If you want more information about characters, watch this video here. Thank you so much for watching. When you go to tell a story that matters. See you later.